find verse 9. The story of Matthew, who, by the way, was Levi and Matthew, same character, and a very interesting story indeed, very much related to the song we just sang. I have a friend, his name is Tony Campolo. I say friend, he's been a part of my life since I was 16 years old. Not a close friend, but certainly an influential person in my life, and someone I've had the opportunity to know and to study along the way. I will tell you this, how I got to know him at 16 got me in a lot of trouble at my First Baptist Church of Winter Garden, Florida. Now, I'll tell you that story at the end if we have time. But recently I heard from Tony that he took a trip out to Hawaii for some preaching opportunities. And you know how that works sometimes, long flights, a little jet lag. And when he got there, he couldn't sleep. So he decided rather than just lay there in the bed and toss and turn, he got up and he went downstairs across the street to an all-night diner. And while he was sitting there just trying to pass the time until he felt tired enough to go to sleep, a group of ladies came in and he immediately surmised that they were working ladies, not at the diner. They were working ladies. And they sat in a booth not far from him, and being by himself, he couldn't help but overhear the conversations that they were having. And along the way, he heard one say, "Hey, tomorrow's my birthday." And the other ladies at the table cheered and said, "Hey, happy birthday, are you going to have a party?" And the lady whose birthday was to come said, in the context of several expletives, "I've never had a birthday party." And that struck a chord with Tony Campolo, who showed back up the next night hoping that that same group of ladies by habit would return to that same diner at about that same time. And he was ready for them with a cake, balloons, and a birthday present to honor this woman of the night who'd never had a birthday party before. The owner of the diner cooperated and allowed him to set up in anticipation that they would come. He said, in fact, they'd be there. They come every night, he said. He said, "I'm going to let you do this, but tell me why you're doing this." And Tony said, "Well, I just want to show these ladies the love of Jesus." And the diner said, "Well, I think you're crazy." The owner said, "I think you're crazy, but I'm going to let you go ahead with it." And he did, and they had a great party. And toward the end, Tony stood up and he wanted to pray for the young woman and the ladies that were with her. And as he was praying, he shared the gospel as clearly as he could at the start of his prayer and throughout the prayer. And then he extended an opportunity that if he'd like to talk about what that meant and how it might apply to their lives and change their lives, he'd love to talk with them. Well, at that point, the owner of the diner, he got a little sideways because now it started to sound more like a church service. So he turns to Tony off the side and he says, "You didn't tell me you're going to come in here doing all that preaching. What church are you with?" And Tony said, "Well, I'm with a church that throws birthday parties for prostitutes in the middle of the night in all-night diners." And the diner owner didn't know what to say, so he just turned and went back to the kitchen. Let me ask you, does that story make you a little uncomfortable? I mean, a preacher man throwing a birthday party in the middle of the night for a prostitute, with prostitutes in the middle of the night. Does that make you at all uncomfortable? And let me ask you if it does, and you'd be in good company, honestly, if it makes you just a little bit uncomfortable. Does it make you uncomfortable because you know Jesus would do that? Or because you're not too sure you would? We meet a guy in today's story in the Bible, not a prostitute, but not far. His name is Matthew, and we find him sitting at a toll booth collecting taxes, charging his own countrymen for access and for transport. Listen to the story, and then we'll talk about what it means. Verse 9 says, as Jesus passed on from there, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth, and he said to him, "Follow me." And he rose and followed him. And as Jesus reclined at table in the house, behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and were reclining with Jesus and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" But when he heard it, he said, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. For I came not to call the righteous, but sinners." In the grand context of discipleship, where we've been these last several weeks in Matthew 7, 8, and now 9, I want you to notice first the context for discipleship. And what I see here in chapter 9, verse 9, is Jesus modeling the Great Commission, which he hadn't extended yet to his disciples, but we're a little further along, and we know that Jesus said, as you go, make disciples. Now, sometimes we read that go and make disciples, but keep in mind in the Great Commission, there are 4 participles, verbs, which imply continuous action, and 1 imperative. The imperative is make disciples. The continuing verbs or the passives are going and baptizing and teaching. So Jesus says it this way, as you go, or going along, make disciples. And now Jesus is going along, and he makes a disciple. Of course, a disciple is first a decision. Someone has to make a decision to follow Christ, and then he disciples them, or they become a disciple or a follower of Jesus Christ. Here's what we see. Jesus just simply modeling the Great Commission all along the way. As he passed on from there, verse 9 tells us, he's just simply making disciples. And notice as he passed on, Jesus saw a man. I underline that. I wish you would. Jesus saw a man. A man, could be a woman, could be a boy or a girl, a person. Jesus saw a man. A man. Don't miss this, as Pastor Avery says. Don't miss this, because this man is the kind of man that you would completely understand and even expect somebody like Jesus or someone of his disciples not to see, but instead to pass on by, meaning going around or passing over. That's what we'd expect to see, but that's not what we see from Jesus. Jesus saw a man. This man, a hated tax collector. This man, a certified outsider. This man, a traitor to his own people. You know how this works, see? Tax collectors are typically Jewish, but who work for the Romans to collect taxes from the Jews. And they can collect above what's required and therefore make themselves wealthy in the process. The Romans didn't respect them because they knew they had traded on their own people. The Jews certainly didn't respect them and despised them because they were getting wealthy serving the oppressor and at the expense of their own livelihood. So here's a man that anybody would have been very happy to just pass on by, to go around, and certainly to have no interchange or conversation with. But Jesus noticed, engaged a man. Jesus saw a man that everyone else would have justified themselves in completely avoiding. Jesus saw a man. Now let's put that in the context of our own discipleship. And remember that we are always on the go. I don't know if you've noticed this, but we're just a going people, aren't we? We are always on the go. We never stay put for very long. We're moving about. We're coming. We're going. We are moving throughout this life and throughout this world. And all along the way, we got to remember, are we living lives on mission or are we just going along? Remember the Great Commission, Jesus models it here. As he's going, he's in process. He's journeying from point A to point B. He's headed somewhere, but the destination isn't as important as the journey. And along the way, as a part of the journey, he sees a man. We, as followers of Christ, are on this same journey. But the challenge for us is not to be so destination-focused or oriented that we pass by men and women who need Jesus day in and day out. As we go, we are to make disciples. That's the commission. Are we living a life of mission everywhere we go? And as we go, all along the way, are we seeing the man? Are we seeing the woman? Or are we looking right past them? We may very well be looking right past the one that is strategically placed along our way who desperately needs to know Jesus. Some we miss just because of the pace of life, the busyness of our day, and we're in a hurry to get somewhere quick. And we just go right past people every day. Some people we pass with more intent because they're the less desirable types. They don't stand out to us, or they're the kind of person that we would intentionally avoid, like a Pharisee would avoid a tax collector. Sometimes we just pass people by either almost accidentally, in the absence of intentionality, or sometimes with intentionality, because those are the kind of people we like to pass on by. Can this be a good time for me to just do a little reminder here that that our simple little mission statement at Champion Forest is this: helping all kinds of people make sense out of life through Christ-centered living. And we put that all kinds in there very strategically and very intentionally with purpose to remind ourselves that all kinds of people need Jesus. It doesn't have to just be me and my kind. It doesn't have to just be the kind that I'm comfortable with. But we're in the business. We are on mission of helping all kinds, without exception, know Jesus and to live a Christ-centered life that makes sense in fellowship with their Maker. That's what we're all about here at Champion Forest. By the way, you may be here this morning and you look around this room and you say, these aren't my kind of people. You may feel like some of these people around here this morning are looking at you saying, you're not our kind of people. If I have any authority whatsoever in a Baptist church, and that is suspicious indeed, if I have any grounds to speak from a position of authority as the senior pastor of this church, can I just make a declarative statement to all of us? We are all the same kind of people. I'm not the right kind. You're not the wrong kind. We are all the kind of people who need Jesus because we're all the kind of people who have sinned against God and fallen out of relationship and fellowship with Him because of our sin. And we're all the kind of people equally who need Jesus. Look around and you'll see the exact same kind of person you are sitting near you. In the context for discipleship, Jesus saw a man. Number two, notice this, the call to discipleship. Again, in verse 9, we see this. Jesus passed on from there. He saw a man called Matthew. That's his name. The other gospel writers use the word Levi, his Hebrew name. So he's a Hebrew, he's Jewish. He's sitting at the tax booth, and he said to him, "Follow me." And Matthew rose and followed him. Notice here the call to discipleship because, of course, this story happens in the context of discipleship. And what you see here is Jesus not recruiting fans, but followers. As Matthew very well might have felt nicely toward Jesus, been encouraged, inspired, he could that day have very well have said, "I'm for you, Jesus. Go get them, Jesus. We need you, Jesus. Go get them." That's called fandom. Like Jesus is just walking through the world trying to create goodwill and hoping people will just like him and want to cheer him on his mission. But Jesus doesn't call fans, he calls followers. And he said to Matthew, "Follow me." What does that imply? It means you got to get up from your tax table or the booth you're sitting in and the money that you're making and all of the possessions that you're able to accumulate through this way of living. And you got to leave all that behind and come with me. Because see, Jesus doesn't ever pull up a seat next to us and sit down and say, "Oh, I'm so glad I'm here with you now." Jesus is always passing by. And as he passes by, he sees a man, he sees a woman, he sees a teenager, he sees a child, and he says, "Come, follow me." Which brings us to a crisis of faith at a point of decision. Do we in fact believe this one who has called us to follow him is worthy of following? And are we willing in this moment to walk away from anything and everything that would keep us from following him in order to follow him? That's not fan, that's following. And that's the very call to discipleship. We see Matthew rose and he followed him. And that may sound in the context of the story like it was just an easy decision. Jesus said, "Follow me." And he got up and he followed him. That was simple, right? Except that, remember, this guy is a man essentially without a country and with few friends. If he leaves the tax table, which is his income, he's not only walking away from his income and his way of living and accumulating all that he has accumulated, he'll never work again as a tax collector because they're standing in line waiting for his share. So it's not like you can walk away from collecting taxes and go back the next day. And not only that, he's already viewed in the eyes of the Jewish people as a traitor, so none of them are going to hire this guy to work for them. That's not going to happen. This guy truly is walking away from everything and into the unknown. Because when a man like Jesus saw him and looked into his soul and said, "Come follow me," everything in him said, that call and my response to it is worth everything I own in order to follow him. And by the way, Jesus' call to us today is no less of a radical call to get up from where we are and to come follow Jesus. Wherever he leads, I'll go. His call to us today is still just a radical of a call to be willing to walk away from anything and everything that would keep us from following him. And oh, by the way, his call to following him is still to start and to stay on a journey after him. See, we want Jesus to come by once in a while and check on us. That's not the call to discipleship. We want Jesus to be available somewhere so that if we need him, we can press the spiritual 911 and he'll answer. But that's not the call of discipleship. The call to discipleship is this and only this, that Jesus Christ sees something in you of potential and value and opportunity, and he says to you with an unbelievable love, having paid an unbelievable price, "Come with me." And you and I, at that moment we're supposed to say, "Yes, Lord." I don't hear any conversation in this dialogue about where are you going? Can you maybe give me a website? I'd like to check it out. Whenever I go somewhere, I like to see where I'm going. Jesus, how long will we be gone? How are we going to eat and live along the way? Who's going with you? We don't see any of it. We don't see Matthew saying, "Well, can I get a substitute to sit at my bench for a little while I go and investigate your claims?" No. What do we see? A radical call to get up from where you are, to walk away from everything you have, and to faithfully and obediently and passionately and persistently follow after Christ. That's the same call, my friend, that Jesus Christ of Nazareth extended to you. I don't know if you were 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 or 20, 30, 40, 50 or 80 years old when Jesus called you, but I can tell you this, his call to Matthew is the same call with which he called you. The call to discipleship. To be conformed to his image, not to be convenienced and comforted. To be conformed at any cost, to forsake all, to deny ourselves, to take up our cross, and to daily follow him, willing to do whatever it takes to be faithful to him. Can I just ask you this morning before we turn to our next point for consideration, are you still living with the mindset of abandonment for the sake of Christ? Do you still see his call as a radical call to radical obedience? Or somewhere since he's called you, have you settled in to a destination Christianity? And oh, by the way, the destination happens to be right where you are. His call to discipleship is a radical call. We're supposed to answer with a radical, unconditional, totally surrendered yes. I know times have changed. We don't quite do it these ways these days anymore, and in many cases for good reason, but I still remember the songs that we sang after the sermon when the Holy Spirit was grabbing our hearts and pulling it out of our chest and calling us to a moment and a point of life-changing decision. I still remember those songs like this one. Take up thy cross and follow me. I heard my master say. Do you remember that? I gave my life to ransom thee. Surrender your all today. Do you remember it? Sing it with me. Wherever he leads, I'll go. Hold on a minute. Don't sing another line. Just think about it for a minute. Wherever he leads, I'll go. Okay, come on, join me now. I'll follow my Christ who loves me so. Wherever he leads, I'll go. How many of those songs have we sung? And didn't you mean business? Yes, you did. But the call is the same. The call to discipleship. Let me make a third observation from the text. It begins in verse 10. Not only the context for and the call to, but I want you to notice confirmation of discipleship. Look at verse 10. And as Jesus reclined at table, and that's not a euphemism or just a saying. That's actually what happened. That's sort of a literal way of saying that's how we eat dinner around here. Not at a table 36 inches high and a chair and 2 feet of American space on either side of us. No, it was a little bit more of an intimate affair in those days and times. The table is lower. There are cushions. There is leaning. Da Vinci's Last Supper was not the Last Supper of Christ. Think more in terms of leaning up against, reclining at table, meaning it was a very intimate affair to share a meal with someone. As Jesus reclined at table in the house, whose house? Matthew's house. Now, Matthew's a little bit humble here, but the other gospel writers, Luke and Mark, tell us this isn't just a meal, this is a banquet. Matthew had a big party at his house that night, or soon after, and invited his friends and neighbors to come and meet this Jesus whom he had met, who had changed his life. So there are many tax collectors and sinners who came, and they're reclining with Jesus, see, and his disciples. So you got a mental image here. Not only is Matthew, who was a hated traitor tax collector, having dinner with Jesus in a very intimate setting, along with Jesus' other disciples, Matthew's invited the bottom of the barrel, the worst of the worst, the dregs of society, outcasts, and the rejects. They're at the table too. Which, by the way, is confirmation of discipleship. As Matthew paid the price of his own discipleship, and while that may sound like woe is me, kind of like we just sang that song, like a funeral dirge, woe is me. I have to follow Jesus. Woe is me. Matthew didn't view it that way. Matthew threw a party to celebrate the life-changing decision that he'd made. He was unashamed of the gospel or of the one whose life had changed his life. And he thought this call to discipleship and this surrender and willingness to leave all to follow after Jesus was an event to be celebrated and shared with others. That's why I say this is the confirmation of discipleship. As Matthew invited all of his friends and his associates, who, by the way, happened to be a lot like him. And true, Matthew's leaving his old life. We've established that. He's no longer going to be a tax collector sitting at the booth taking taxes. He's not going to be doing that anymore. His life is changing. He's going in a new direction. He's following Jesus. But isn't discipleship, if we apply the test, not only leaving where you are, but taking others with you as you go? Do you see? What did Jesus say on the shores of the Galilee? Come follow me. I'll make you fishers of men. So what we see here is some confirmation that while, yes, Matthew's leaving his old life behind, he's taking people from his old life with him when he goes, which is exactly what we've been called to do. That is discipleship, and that confirms the fact that we're indeed following after Jesus. Because if we are following the Master, we will be fishing for men. Do you see? And if we aren't fishing for men, we have to ask ourselves, are we really following the Master who said, I will make you fishers of men? This is discipleship being fleshed out. A lot of people think discipleship's just sitting around in a small group and reading some deep theological book and scratching your theological navel or your forehead and going, wow. Hey, look, I love to go deeper and I'm all about deep discipleship. But if discipleship takes you so deep that no one ever goes there with you, you are not being discipled, you're being distracted. The very essence of discipleship is following Jesus and doing what Jesus does and came to do. And that's very clear, my friend, that as we go, we invite others to come and go along with us. And who else could Matthew have invited to his house for dinner but fellow sinners and tax collectors, probably drunkards and prostitutes and others who were just like him? the kind of person he was. But even Matthew knew that if I'm the kind of person Jesus loves and accepts and invites to follow, these people are the same kind as I was, so they can become the kind of person I'm becoming. Come with me. I love this confirmation of discipleship. The evangelized has become an evangelist. And it's good for Matthew because he already knew the pagan pool. He'd been swimming in it all his life. So when it came time to follow Jesus and to take some folks along with him, he didn't have to go far to find some people, some pagans, some unbelievers, some sinners and tax collectors to introduce to Jesus who had changed his life. Let me introduce you to the man. Come and see. Let me tell you about a guy I met. And so we see confirmation here through his intentionality to engage in and through the relationships that he had with lost people. I was a seminary student and a pastor of a church, and it occurred to me as I was preaching one Sunday, one of these sermons on missions and evangelism and soul winning and about winning your friends to Jesus. It occurred to me in a moment, as I was up here fussing at everybody else about winning their friends to Jesus, that I didn't have any friends to win to Jesus. I mean, I'm pastoring a church. A lot of those people were Christians. Maybe, I think. I'm going to seminary every day. I sit 4 or 5 hours a day in a seminary class. Most of those people are probably Christians. I hope they were. I'm in the car back and forth with other pastors. We spend 2.5 hours a day commuting back and forth to seminary. I assume they're Christians. Stop by the hospital and visit a deacon or a choir member or someone who's a part of the church. They're Christians. I go to a meeting in that evening or committee meeting or a project, and all those people are Christians. And then I come home to my Christian home with my Christian wife. And before long, a day had come and gone, and I had no contact whatsoever, speak nothing of a relationship with anybody that Jesus was seeking to save. I was living in a bubble. Do you know what I mean? Do you know the longer that you're a Christian, the fewer non-Christian friends you have? That's a fact. And on the one hand, it's totally understandable because your life's changed and you're going in a new direction. And typically going to leave people behind that were there when you were there. You're not there anymore. So that means you and I've got to put some intentionality back into our journey to engage with and to get to know in an authentic way. I don't mean just so you can scalp them someday down the road with the gospel. I mean to honestly value that person the way Jesus values them. To pray for them, that you might build a relationship with them, to invest in them, and finally to share the gospel with them and invite them to come along with you along the way. You know how I solved my problem, by the way? I volunteered to coach a Little League baseball team just down the street from the church. And I had 10 to 12-year-olds on my baseball team, and at least 9 of them were heathens. Just rotten to the core, pagans, unbelievers. And they weren't very good at baseball either, I found out. But that could have been on me. I was the coach. But you know, the neat thing is, over a couple of years of coaching that little team, 6 of those boys and their parents ended up being either saved or connected to our church if they'd already know the Lord. And all that was just me being intentional to say, I got to get out of this Christian bubble. I got to meet somebody. I've got to build a relationship with somebody. I've got to invest in somebody because I'm going along here following Jesus and there ain't nobody following me. And I don't know about you, but that's not the Great Commission. And the gospel's always shared best and most effectively through relationships, not throwing a gospel tract and hitting them in the head as you drive by at 55 miles an hour. Listen, I appreciate your passion and your conviction, but turn or burn, brother, isn't probably going to get them to heaven. Your witness ware and the fish on the bumper of your car, good for you. But I'm telling you still today, maybe more so than ever, people listen to people they know and trust. People like you and people like me. So what is it that confirms your discipleship? Who have you called out to come and follow Jesus as you follow him? Who are you praying for? Who are you investing in? Versus how many people are you just walking past as you live life following Jesus? Well, I got one more. It's in verse 11, and I call this the challenges within discipleship. The confirmation of, now notice the challenges within, because you got to deal with the old Pharisees. They're here. In verse 11, and when the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? Meaning they would have never done such. Never. See, they were separatists who believed that sinners and tax collectors were unclean, and you wouldn't have anything to do with those unclean people because they might contaminate you. You'd be unclean, especially to sit at a table and to share a meal and to rub up against, to touch sinners. No, thank you. So if your teacher is a religious man and he's come from God as he claims, what in the world's he doing in there sitting at a table reclining on sinners and tax collectors? So see, there'll be some challenges to your discipleship. There'll be some people that'll say to people like Tony Campolo, God loves prostitutes, but you've got no business in an all-night diner in the middle of the night throwing a birthday party for one of them. There'll be some challenges to you building relationships with unbelievers, maybe even atheists or agnostics, maybe people who aren't even interested in the things of God. There'll be some challenges to your true discipleship as you follow after Christ and invite others to come along and go with you. There'll be some who will quote scripture like, come out from among them and be separate. Touch not the unholy thing. What fellowship does light have with darkness? There'll be people who quote all those verses. Can I just tell you something? It's so easy to misquote those verses and to take them out of context. And then if you turn right around and apply it towards Jesus, Jesus couldn't have even fulfilled God's will if that's what those verses mean. Can I just tell you something? Jesus hung out with sinners and tax collectors. He didn't have to be one. He didn't have to become one. Somebody once said Jesus went into bars, but he didn't start drinking. He closed them down and turned drunks into disciples. That's what Jesus did. So don't you think for a minute that you can just run out there and live like the devil because you want to witness to the devil. Don't go there. But what I am telling you is, the fact that you have a relationship with a Buddhist does not endanger you of becoming a Buddhist, I hope. Any more than having a relationship with somebody who's not a churchgoer, a Christ follower, or a God believer means that you're suddenly going to become an atheist. You can stand in the light and still impact darkness. Now I want you to notice this as we close. When he heard it, Jesus, their complaints, meaning their murmuring. Those who are well, he said, have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. A quote from Hosea, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. You guys ought to be loving these people, not despising and judging these people. You guys are all caught up in the religion of the day, and you're missing the most important piece, relationship with God and with man. For I came not to call the righteous, which they would have said, oh, you mean us, because they saw themselves as righteous, self-righteous. Therefore, they had no need of a physician. I mean, when you're feeling well and everything's fine and the doctor calls and says, come and see me, what do you say? No, thank you, because you have no need of a physician. But imagine a physician who doesn't want to hang around with sick people. What kind of doctor is that? Jesus came for sinners. I'm telling you something else too. If you're on mission with Jesus, you're going to find yourself in the company of sinners. Or you might not be on mission of Jesus. For I came, statement of purpose, his mission, not to call the righteous, but sinners. So Jesus is willing to recline at the table with all kinds of people, including or especially sinners. Very ones he came for, the least, the lonely, the last, and the lost. So the challenge to our discipleship. Can I articulate a few challenges very quickly? Is number one, to remember who we were before Jesus called us to follow him. And some of you have adult experiences that you look back on and say, thank God for rescuing me from that lifestyle. Others, you were saved at a young, tender age. You hadn't started robbing banks yet. You weren't addicted to heroin. You hadn't sold your body on the streets as a prostitute. You weren't doing those things. You hadn't stolen. You weren't there. You were a sweet, innocent little child. And can I just put a little twist on it? Maybe it's a little easier for us to remember what we might have become had it not been for the grace of God. And people say to me sometimes, Pastor, I don't have a testimony like that. Hey, your testimony is, imagine what God's grace has protected you from. Because it had not been for the grace of God, you could have been, might have been, just like one of the kind of people that we tend to judge and shun and avoid. Remember who you were or might have become by grace. Remember who He is. He's the Savior, and the only reason He's a Savior is for saving sinners. So that's the whole point, isn't it? So you and I have to resist the Pharisaical urge to make this us or them and join Him on His mission, us for them. And ask ourselves consistently and continually as we live life following Jesus. Am I on mission, His mission? Is His mission my mission? Is this the commission that He gave me? And am I walking in faithfulness and fellowship with Him to accomplish it? Is anyone going to be in heaven someday because I was on earth this day? As I turn around behind me, is anyone following me as I follow after Christ? Or am I going to show up at heaven's door someday sadly alone? Because while I was following Jesus, nobody was following me to Jesus. I have an opportunity for you. Today, this evening, 5 p.m., Life on Mission training begins our second semester here at Champion Forest. If you don't know how to have a gospel conversation with somebody who doesn't know the Lord, you come, give us 6 weeks or so. We'll talk you through 3 circles on how to very conversationally share your faith and lead someone to Christ so that when you show up at the gates of heaven, there'll be somebody showing up because you showed up. 5 p.m. today. You don't have to register. You don't have to call ahead. You don't have to bring anything. If you have an interest in knowing how to share your faith, very conversationally, you be here today at 5 o'clock. Give us 6 or 7 weeks, hour and a half a week, and I assure you, when this process is over, you'll know what to say, how to say it, and you'll have the confidence to say it. What time does it start? 5 o'clock today. Oh, I mentioned that Tony Campolo got me in trouble. Did you want to hear about that? So I went to this Jesus Fest, as they used to call them, at a fairgrounds in Orlando, Florida. I was 16 years old. And Tony Campolo was a very young preacher at the time, not many years older than me, and he was a gutsy guy. And did you know you can say some things in a group of teenagers at a festival that you really can't say in a local Baptist church? So at the Jesus Festival, Tony Campolo said, I want to tell you 3 things. He said, thing number 1 is there are millions of people dying and going to hell every day. Thing number 2 is most of you don't give a, and he said it. And thing number 3 is most of you are more concerned with that I said than you are with millions of people dying and going to hell every day. I thought that was so cool. Did I mention I was 16? I couldn't get back to my home church fast enough, to the First Baptist Church of Winter Garden, Florida, with the Honorable K-Fay Deshay as senior pastor. And they had us come up on Sunday night and share our experiences from the Jesus Fest. And my 16-year-old self walked up to the stage, turned and stood behind the pulpit and said, I have 3 things to say to you people today. Number 1, there are millions of people dying and going to hell. Number 2, most of you don't give a, and I said it. And number 3, most of you are more concerned that I said it than the fact that millions of people are dying to go into hell. And I couldn't get off that stage fast enough. 3 deacons, the minister of music, the senior pastor, the youth pastor, and my mama were chasing me out the side door over there. That, my friend, is why I didn't use that word today. Because I can learn my lesson. But on the other hand, isn't it true? Isn't it true that a 4-letter word gets our attention, but millions of people dying and going to hell? Brothers and sisters, that may not be the right thing to say or the right way to say it, but it doesn't make it untrue. You want to be a disciple of Jesus? Follow me. I'll make you fishers of men.
We hope that you've enjoyed the message today and that it will be a source of encouragement to you this week. At Champion Forest Baptist Church, we desire to help people make sense out of life through Christ-centered living. And that's because with Christ, we have hope and true satisfaction. The Bible clearly states that all men have offended God by worshiping things He created instead of Him. We have chosen to reject His authority in our life and look for satisfaction in things He created instead of Him, which is ultimately pointless given that He is truly the only thing that can satisfy us completely. He is the perfection of everything we seek. The problem is, though, that once we have sinned against Him by turning to these other things, a gap is created between us, not allowing us to access Him anymore to find this satisfaction. God's character demands that our rebellion be accounted for before He forgives us. And this is the beauty of the message of Jesus. Christ is perfect in every way. He never rebelled against God, and He took upon our punishment on Himself so that we could be reconciled to God and be fully satisfied in Him, gaining eternal life. We need Jesus because without Him we are without hope, both in this life and for eternity. Turn to Christ alone for forgiveness and find satisfaction fully in our great God. Once again, thanks for joining us today, and we hope to see you soon.